Part 1. The Foundation of the Enigma. In the world of American finance, there exists a phenomenon that appears almost paradoxical. A corporate empire built not on spectacle, but on patience. Not on rapid conquest, but on quiet accumulation. And not by men seeking the spotlight, but by men who, even in their prime, preferred the silence of thought to the noise of markets. This is the story of Berkshire Hathaway, a company that became less a corporation and more a financial organism, alive and growing beneath the surface of global capitalism. And at its helm stood two figures who seemed, at first glance, almost ordinary. One, a soft-spoken Nebraskan with an unshakable belief in rationality. The other, a sharp-eyed Californian lawyer with a mind tuned to systems, probabilities, and human folly. Warren Buffett and Charles Thomas Munger, two men who built one of the most quietly powerful financial empires in modern history. Two men who rewired the very psychology of investing. Two men who proved that wealth, true wealth, is not a product of speed, but of understanding. Yet Berkshire Hathaway is more than a success story. It is an enigma, because what it seems to be on the surface, a holding company, barely hints at what it truly became. A decentralized network of independently run businesses, a reservoir of insurance float, a compounding machine engineered to use time itself as leverage, and above all, a monument to an idea. The idea that intelligence is not found in complexity, but in clarity. To understand Berkshire, one must start long before its ascent, long before Buffett and Munger even met, to the world that shaped them, the America that formed them, and the subtle forces that drew them together. Because this empire did not erupt into existence, it accumulated. It grew slowly, almost invisibly, like geological pressure beneath bedrock. And when it surfaced, the world was left wondering how such power had gone unnoticed for so long. This is the Berkshire Enigma. The world that built Buffett Warren. Edward Buffett was born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1930, the same year the American stock market cracked and the nation sank into the Great Depression. Banks collapsed, fortunes evaporated, and families across the country learned new definitions of scarcity. The timing was meaningful. Buffett's worldview would be shaped not by abundance, but by loss. Not by expansion, but by survival. His father, Howard Buffett, was a stockbroker and later a congressman, a man who believed deeply in personal responsibility and conservative economics. His mother, Layla, ran the household with discipline and emotional restraint. The Buffets were not poor, but neither were they insulated from the pressures of the era. Warren grew up watching financial devastation not as abstraction, but as daily reality. Grocery bills unpaid, families losing homes, political speeches about austerity and responsibility. In this environment, money was not only a resource, it was security. By the age of 7, Warren was fascinated by numbers. By 10, he was reading financial tables in the newspaper the way other children read comics. 11, he bought his first stock, 3 shares of Citi Service Preferred, for $38 each. The price dropped to $27, and young Warren panicked. When it recovered to $40, he sold. He made a small profit. But weeks later, the stock climbed past $200. The lesson was not lost. He understood early that markets reward patience more than intelligence. But patience is learned slowly. Understanding is refined over time. Warren's teenage years were a study in small experiments. Door-to-door sales, pinball machine businesses, newspaper routes. He wasn't chasing wealth, he was chasing leverage, trying to discover how effort could be multiplied without being repeated. This pursuit would later define his career. The formation of a systematic mind. While Buffett was absorbing the emotional and practical lessons of capitalism, another boy, 2,000 miles away, was learning how systems shape the world. Charles Thomas Munger was born in 1924 in Omaha as well, though the two would not meet until adulthood. Munger came from a family of lawyers, storytellers, and thinkers. He was intellectually restless, intensely logical. Where Warren saw patterns in numbers, Charlie saw patterns in behavior. His childhood was steeped in books, history, mathematics, philosophy, psychology. He studied the way humans think, and more importantly, the ways they fail to think. When World War II erupted, Munger served as a meteorologist in the U.S. Army Air Corps. The war taught him the brutal consequences of error. Precision mattered, discipline mattered, decision-making mattered. After the war, he attended Harvard Law School without an undergraduate degree, after impressing the admissions office with sheer intellect. He became a lawyer in California, but law did not satisfy him. He did not want to solve disputes. He wanted to understand reality. It was this pursuit, the search for clear thinking, that would later become the philosophical engine of Berkshire Hathaway. The meeting. It is often said that Buffett and Munger were destined to work together, not because of personality, not because of ambition, but because of worldview. They both believed that the world could be understood, not perfectly, but better than most believed possible. A mutual acquaintance arranged an introduction in 1959. The two men, one 35, the other 29, met in Omaha at a dinner party. The conversation lasted hours. They spoke in complete sentences. They finished each other's thoughts. They did not talk about making money. They talked about thinking, mental models, probabilities, human misjudgment, how most people spend their lives reacting instead of reasoning. Munger once said of Buffett, "Warren had the best 30-second mind I'd ever seen." Buffett later said of Munger, "He expanded my mind. He made me reach." Together, they were not just business partners. They were co-architects of a way of seeing. This is crucial, because Berkshire Hathaway was not simply built through decisions. It was built through filters, models of judgment, systems of reasoning, methods for eliminating error before action. The empire grew not from boldness, but from clarity. The company that meant nothing. And yet, strangely, the financial empire that Buffett and Munger would construct did not begin with vision or strategy. It began with a mistake. Berkshire Hathaway was not a clever acquisition. It was a failing textile mill. Buffett first noticed Berkshire because its stock was cheap, extremely cheap. The company was bleeding. It was on the wrong side of the future. But its assets, land, machinery, equipment, were valued higher than the stock price. To Buffett, shaped by Benjamin Graham's teachings of value investment, this looked like opportunity. He bought shares, then more shares, then a controlling stake. It was only later, painfully, that he realized he had purchased a business with no viable future. The economics of textile manufacturing in America were deteriorating. Competition overseas was increasing. Profit margins were thinning. Berkshire Hathaway, as a textile company, would never create wealth, but it could become something else. Buffett realized that Berkshire could function as a vehicle, a structure, a legal shell through which he could acquire other businesses. Not to merge them, not to reorganize them, but to own them. This was the turning point. Berkshire Hathaway would not operate businesses. It would hold them. It would provide capital. It would allow autonomy. It would grow quietly without the pressure of quarterly performance. This model was almost unheard of at the time. Corporations wanted control. Berkshire wanted coordination. Where other companies built hierarchies, Berkshire built trust. Where others used debt, Berkshire used float. And that changed everything. The discovery of float is one of the most misunderstood concepts in finance. And yet, it is the beating heart of the Berkshire Enigma. In simple terms, float is money that does not belong to you, but that you are allowed to hold and invest. Insurance premiums provide float. Customers pay today. Claims are paid later. Between those events, Time exists, and in that time, money can grow. Buffett began acquiring insurance companies not for their profits, but for their float. It was leverage without debt, a funding source that did not require repayment on fixed terms. Capital that could be deployed into stocks and businesses that compounded over decades. This discovery transformed Berkshire from a holding company into a compounding machine. Slow, steady, relentless, invisible, until it wasn't. The shift in philosophy. In the early years of Buffett's career, he followed Benjamin Graham's approach closely. Buy cheap companies, sell when they reach fair value, repeat. But Charlie Munger changed this. Munger argued that it was far better to buy a great business at a fair price than a fair business at a great price. Because great businesses compound. They grow without requiring constant reinvestment. They scale with time. This shift was profound. It meant that Buffett no longer sought bargains. He sought machines, American Express, the Washington Post, GEICO, businesses with durable advantages, businesses that did not need to be replaced, businesses that generated wealth simply through continued existence. This was not investing, this was curation, a selection of companies engineered to survive decades, maybe centuries. The empire takes shape. By the late 1970s, Berkshire Hathaway was no longer a textile company. It was the central nervous system of a growing constellation of businesses: insurance, railroads, energy, manufacturing, consumer goods, financial services. But what made Berkshire unusual was not what it owned, but how it owned it. Berkshire did not interfere. It did not restructure. It did not replace management. Instead, Buffett and Munger selected CEOs who were already exceptional. Then they let them operate independently, forever. The result was a culture of trust, a system where incentives were aligned, no bureaucracy, no micromanagement, no unnecessary movement. This is the hidden architecture of Berkshire Hathaway, a network of excellence held together not by force, but by philosophy. Part 2. The Rise of the Invisible Empire. It began slowly, almost too slowly for the outside world to notice. A small acquisition here, a minority share there. But each decision carried a logic that was invisible to those who watched only the surface of markets. While the world focused on stock tickers and quarterly earnings, Buffett and Munger were building something deeper, something structural. They were constructing a system of compounding ecosystems. Berkshire Hathaway was no longer simply a corporation. It had become a vessel, a vault, and a circulatory network of capital. A system where cash moved quietly, like groundwater beneath the surface, nourishing whatever roots could absorb and multiply it. The key was autonomy. Where most corporations sought control, Berkshire sought freedom. Where Wall Street demanded short-term performance, Berkshire encouraged decades-long patience. To outsiders, it seemed strange. To Buffett and Munger, it was inevitable. Because they understood something most investors never do. Wealth is not merely accumulated. It is grown. It is cultivated, the way one tends an orchard instead of harvesting a field. And so the orchard began to expand. The acquisitions that defined the empire. Among Berkshire Hathaway's earliest and most influential acquisitions were companies that had one trait in common: durable competitive advantage. Not glamour, not volatility, instead, reliability. One of the first was GEICO, the Government Employees Insurance Company. Buffett had studied GEICO as a young man, even traveling to Washington, D.C. at age 21 to meet its executives unannounced. What he discovered was not just an insurance business, but a model. General Electric Insurance Company sold insurance directly to consumers rather than through agents, reducing costs and increasing margins. This was not simply efficiency, it was structural advantage. General Electric Insurance Company also provided something more valuable than profits: float, the raw material of compounding. Then came the Washington Post, a company not only financially strong but culturally influential. The Post was not purchased as a trophy. It was purchased because newspapers, at the time, held local monopolies. A newspaper did not merely report reality, it shaped it. Years later would come American Express. The brand was more than a financial institution. It was a status identity, a psychological moat stronger than steel. Then Coca-Cola, a product that transcended geography, language, and era. A beverage that required no education and no persuasion, only familiarity. Buffett liked businesses that the world could not forget. And while these investments brought Berkshire financial power, they did not require intervention. Berkshire did not reorganize or restructure. It simply allocated capital, allowed time to unfold, allowed the businesses to grow in accordance with their own nature. This was capitalism without force, growth without friction, wealth without haste, the culture of quiet excellence. To understand Berkshire Hathaway, one must understand culture, not the culture of offices or slogans, but the culture of decision-making. Most corporations are defined by motion, meetings, reviews, projections, strategies. Berkshire, however, was defined by stillness, the stillness of thinking, the stillness of restraint. Buffett and Munger believed that most errors in business came not from inaction, but from too much action. They avoided unnecessary acquisitions. They avoided businesses dependent on commodities. They avoided complexity. This restraint was not passive. It was disciplined. They created an environment where managers were trusted fully, where autonomy was rewarded, where short-term performance was secondary to long-term durability, where reputation mattered more than profit. The message was simple: run your business as if you will own it forever. This philosophy began attracting a particular kind of leader: disciplined, independent, rational. And once inside Berkshire, these leaders rarely left. They didn't need to. They had found refuge from corporate noise. In this silence, excellence takes root. The psychology of patience. To understand how Berkshire grew, one must understand the psychology of time. Buffett once said, "The stock market is designed to transfer money from the active to the patient." But patience, in a world driven by speed, is deeply unnatural. Humans seek immediacy, certainty, praise. Buffett and Munger rejected all of it. They understood that compounding requires not only time, but the absence of interruption, the absence of panic, the refusal to be influenced by temporary trends. This was not merely financial discipline, it was emotional discipline. It meant reading while others reacted. It meant waiting while others rushed. It meant investing when others were afraid and refraining when others were greedy. This mindset would later become legendary. During the savings and loan crisis, Berkshire waited. During the dot-com bubble, Berkshire refused to chase hype. During the financial crisis of 2008, Berkshire stepped forward while others retreated. Patience was not passive, it was strategic readiness, a blade unsheathed only when the moment was right. The network begins to spread by the turn of the millennium. Berkshire Hathaway had evolved beyond even Buffett and Munger's original expectations. It had become a decentralized network of economic influence. Railroads moving the physical economy, utilities powering American cities, banking and finance shaping the flow of credit, consumer goods embedded in daily life, insurance underwriting risk itself. Berkshire was not simply present in the economy, it was woven into it. Yet, to the public eye, Berkshire did not appear powerful. There were no television campaigns, no aggressive marketing, no corporate spectacle. The empire was hidden in plain sight, not because it was invisible, but because it was quiet. The partnership that defied time. The world often tries to assign simple labels: Buffett, the cheerful investor; Munger, the sharp-witted philosopher. But their partnership was not a division of roles. It was an interlocking system. Buffett provided optimism. Munger provided skepticism. Buffett found opportunity. Munger removed illusion. Together, they built a decision-making engine resilient against bias, fear, and irrationality. As Munger famously said, "It's not supposed to be easy. If it were easy, everyone would be rich." But difficulty was not the barrier. Misjudgment was. To correct this, the two built a mental framework based on 1. Rationality, the willingness to see reality as it is. 2. Discipline, the ability to act only when the odds are favorable. 3. Humility, the knowledge that the world is complex and human minds are fragile. This philosophy spread throughout Berkshire's culture like an invisible doctrine, not written, not formalized, simply lived. The world begins to notice. By the early 2000s, Berkshire Hathaway had become one of the most valuable corporations in the world. Yet the scale of its influence remained misunderstood. Most saw its stock price, few saw its architecture. In financial circles, analysts began to speak of Berkshire not as a company, but as a model, a blueprint for how capitalism could operate when guided not by ambition, but by clarity. The quiet empire was no longer invisible. It was inevitable. But what came next, the final evolution of Berkshire Hathaway, would elevate the company from influential to almost mythic. Because eventually, Berkshire would stop simply investing in the world. It would begin to shape it. Part 3. The Legacy and the Enigma. As Berkshire Hathaway entered the 21st century, it became clear that the empire Buffett and Munger built was no ordinary financial institution. It did not conform to the rules that governed traditional corporate power. It had no central headquarters full of analysts, no sprawling management bureaucracy, no layers of oversight committees. Instead, Berkshire resembled something much older and much rarer. A guild of independent craftsmen, each master in their trade, united not by command but by trust. Businesses under Berkshire did not merely perform, they endured. They persisted through recessions, political upheaval, and market panics. They did so because their leadership was allowed to remain intact. Their cultures were not stripped for efficiency or restructured for growth. They were preserved. This was the quiet brilliance of Berkshire Hathaway. It acquired companies that already knew how to win, then simply stepped aside. While Wall Street watched quarterly earnings, Berkshire watched decades. While others managed performance, Berkshire managed identity. This is where the enigma deepens. For Berkshire was not truly built on financial strategy. It was built on judgment, a skill that cannot be automated, industrialized, or standardized, a skill that dies when ego replaces discipline. And it is here, in the realm of quiet judgment, that the legacy of Buffett and Munger becomes most profound. The power of influence without force. By the mid-2000s, Berkshire Hathaway was no longer simply a participant in global markets. It had become a stabilizing force within them. When crises struck, Berkshire's presence signaled confidence. When institutions faltered, Berkshire provided capital, not as speculation, but as restoration. During the 2008 financial crisis, when fear overtook reason and markets collapsed under their own velocity, Berkshire stepped forward. Not with reckless risk-taking, but with understanding. It invested in companies not because they were cheap, but because they were necessary. Because society could not function without them. Berkshire became the backbone of American capitalism not by conquering markets, but by supporting them when it mattered most. This was not opportunism. It was responsibility, an invisible stability. A quiet empire strengthening the economy from behind the curtain. And yet, publicly, it remained humble. The annual shareholder meeting, held in Omaha, felt less like a corporate gathering and more like a town festival. Thousands would travel across continents to hear Buffett and Munger speak, not because they promised wealth, but because they offered something rarer: clarity, the ability to understand the world without distortion. The philosophy of human nature. No empire can be understood through numbers alone. To understand Berkshire Hathaway, one must understand how Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger viewed people. They did not believe that humans are rational. They believed that humans try to be rational, while emotions, desires, fears, and biases constantly interfere. Their advantage was not superior intelligence. It was the refusal to lie to themselves. They acknowledged that ego is corrosive, that envy is destructive, that impatience is costly, that complexity hides the truth more than revealing it. They favored simplicity, not as minimalism, but as precision. As Munger said, the world is not driven by greed. It's driven by envy. Buffett added, rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. They built Berkshire not to be brilliant, but to avoid the errors that destroy. Avoiding stupidity was more powerful than seeking genius. This was their secret, the question of succession. But even the greatest compounding machine cannot escape time. A question began to emerge. What happens when the architects are gone? Buffett and Munger planned carefully. Leadership roles were identified not through charisma, but through temperament. Executives such as Greg Abel and Ajit Jain were elevated because they shared the same principles: rationality, discipline, humility. The Berkshire culture was designed not simply to operate with Buffett and Munger, but after them. And yet, there is an unavoidable truth. Some things cannot be replicated. The partnership between Buffett and Munger was not a corporate function. It was a phenomenon, a convergence of temperament, intellect, and vision unlikely to occur twice in the same century. When their leadership eventually passes into history, Berkshire will remain. But something subtle, something foundational, will change. The question is not whether Berkshire will survive. It will. The question is whether the world will remain capable of producing minds like theirs. The enigma lingers today. Berkshire Hathaway stands as one of the most resilient, decentralized, and influential financial structures in modern history. It generates billions in earnings. It holds thousands of employees across dozens of industries. It remains deeply woven into the American economy. Yet the empire still carries an air of mystery, because it was built without spectacle, without ceremony, without urgency. It grew like a cathedral, stone by stone, slowly, deliberately, in silence. And when modern investors look upon it, they often ask the same question: how did something so enormous appear without anyone noticing? The answer is simple, because while the world was chasing extraordinary moments, Buffett and Munger were pursuing ordinary days, repeated consistently, without fail, for a lifetime. In the end, Berkshire Hathaway is not merely a financial empire. It is a monument to a different way of being, a life lived slowly, a mind trained gently, a world approached patiently. The Berkshire Enigma is not how Buffett and Munger built their wealth. The enigma is why so few others ever will. Final thought. And so the story concludes, not with dramatic triumph, nor with finality, but with a question that lingers long after the screen fades. In a world obsessed with speed, noise, and urgency, will we remember that some of the greatest empires ever built were constructed in silence?